Hello, this is Chris Voti, but you're free to call me Madcap. And today is a very special video. I am going to give a special exclusive to my next upcoming series, the Daygar Legacy. Now, this is kind of a big deal because so far I've been very private about the details of this story. I've given some basic information to kind of whet your appetite, but I haven't given a lot of details. Why is it called Daygar? What is a Daygar? And what's really going on with the vampires in the stories and our characters? How are they Templars? The Templars were disbanded 40 years by the time this story comes out. So I'm going to answer many of those questions today. So before I go into what the book series is going to be about, I need to use a little bit of history. Now, I studied a lot of history for this book series. I thought I could write this story in a month, and it took me 6 months to do all the research I needed. And in fact, I employed the use of a wiki tool to keep track of all the information because there was just so much. So this is going to be an alternate history story. I'm starting with history, and I'm putting in parts that actually explain what happens as far as the book is concerned. You know, what happened and how all these things connected that seem disconnected with each other. So we have to start with Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne was responsible of uniting all of Europe under a single rule, which had not been seen since the time of Rome, and it was called the Holy Roman Empire. After the fall of his line, it started breaking up, but the Holy Roman Empire did exist for quite some time, but it mostly occupied what is now known as Germany. Now, Charlemagne traveled around a lot to keep the strength of his empire. But there was another reason why he was doing it. He was also hunting vampires. Charlemagne was an amazing man. Not a perfect man, but an amazing man. And at the time, vampires had kind of the run of the land. They were very disorganized, but no one really fought against them. So it's kind of like deer in a way that if you don't hunt them, they'll overpopulate and then kind of starve themselves. But vampires had the lay of the land, and a lot of people were fearful of going out at night. People disappeared and all of that. So Charlemagne pushed back the vampires to give the land back to the people, although history never records it because he kept that part secret. Charlemagne knew that he couldn't trust any royal line to guard against the vampire threat, because any vampire line, well, any royal family line could be easily replaced, and the responsibility would get lost during time. He believed that the best option was to give the responsibility to the Pope, that while family lines may fall, the church would last forever. And seeing how long the papacy has lasted, that seems like a good idea. Now we jump ahead a few hundred years to the start of the Templars. The Templars were basically a group of soldiers in Jerusalem fighting against the Muslim or the Mongols. Now, they actually established one of the first banking systems in Europe ever. They helped pilgrims go from Jerusalem to Europe, a pilgrimage, and people would give their money to the Templars, their small interest fee taken out, and at the end of their journey, they'd pick up their money. And the Templars ended up getting... the Templars made a lot of money. That's why you hear about Templar treasures, which is kind of a joke. And I reasoned that the Templars passed around this rumor that there was this great treasure somewhere because they wanted people to search for something that didn't actually exist. The money that the Templars gained built their infrastructure. But also during their time of Jerusalem, they dealt with vampires, especially protecting the pilgrims. They had to fight against vampires that would pick off people going along the pilgrimage. The Pope designated them that they would also be responsible for hunting vampires, thus created the Templar Hunters. The Templar Hunters was a secret pact within the already secret Templars. They couldn't hold any official title, so that's why there's like really no mention of them in history, but their primary responsibility was for hunting vampires, and in many ways they could ignore any rule of the Templars so long as it was for hunting vampires. However, they still held up to the same standard of being a Templar. Now, one of the things that the Templar did for the hunters is because Templars basically took you as an adult. You didn't get trained to be a Templar. You had to demonstrate you were, and if it required you sword fighting, you already had to know how to sword fight. When it came to hunting vampires, this was not something that you could just pick up as an adult. It's something that you needed to be trained to do. I mean, some really good warriors could do it, but defending against humans and fighting against vampires, two completely different things. So the Templars developed hunter families, and these were families that were given land and given a stipend of money to help build this land into something. Usually it was to build a village to produce some sort of profit, and that money was given to the Templars again for them to redistribute. But their other primary responsibility was to raise children on how to hunt vampires. Now, some Grand Masters also had their families also became part of these hunter families. So basically raising a child from birth up till adulthood and that was usually like 16, how to hunt vampires effectively, so they were automatically given acceptance into the hunters. But if they ever wanted to be a leader, they would have to leave that and kind of start over in the Templar ranks. Now, going back to a little bit of history, at the turn of the 14th century, around 1309, King Philip, I believe, the King of France, had a sizable debt to the Templars. He was doing all of these wars all over the place, and he was really, really in debt. About a year or two prior, he actually took the entire Jewish population of a town, arrested them, took all of their stuff and all of their money just to kind of maintain his lifestyle and his wars. He was not a very good man. But he basically did the same thing to the Templar Knights. He arrested all of the ones in France, branded them as heretics, and held them. They held a trial for them, where they were prosecuted for admitting that they were heretics. Now, back then, torture was admissible in court. If someone tortured you and you admitted to something in torture, that was considered a confession. Nowadays, that's absurd, but back then it was like, well, you know, if you're truly innocent, then God will stop us. So, and Jacques de Morlaix was burned at the stake for being a heretic. Now, the Catholic Church knew they were innocent, but did nothing to stop this. Only a few years later did they actually officially disband the Templars, but by then the damage was done, and people disliked the Templars. Now, King Philip did this to try to get their resources, but the church ended up taking it, so Felipe's plan was all for naught. He didn't have to pay back the debt, but he didn't really get any money out of this. Now, what I state in my book, and it's not directly in there, it's kind of like in between the lines, is that Philip was being manipulated by vampires. They were basically promising him like land and riches and whatnot, and got him to turn against the Templars. The Templars was the vampires' greatest threat. They were an actual threat to the vampires, so they had to get rid of them. And the vampires had a very big plan in the works. Templars would stop them. So basically, they got King Philip to turn against the Templars. But then later, King Philip ended up dying. Well, actually, very soon afterwards, he died. Now we jump to the beginning of my story. Now, my characters are Templar. They're Templar hunters. But the order no longer exists. Many of the families that were linked to the Templars basically disappeared, went into hiding. Only a few continued to practice their traditions, such as my main character's family. His name is Jacques de Volker. Yeah. And he is a descendant, a great nephew of Jacques de Morlaix. Actually, his birth name is Jacob, but he changed it when he became a Templar. And Volker is his father's name. I had to learn so much about the naming scheme back then. It's nothing like it is today. It's actually a little bit harder to do. Easier and harder. So they're basically trained vampire hunters, but there's only so few of them left. There's like 10 characters total that are vampire hunters. Now, the first book that's going to be free, there's only 4 characters. With the official main story that comes right after that, a 5th is introduced in the first few chapters that he just joined the ranks. I kind of did this so it doesn't seem like the characters are explaining things that they should already know. They're explaining things to a new person, so through his experience, you can kind of find out why things are the way they are. And I did a lot of research into how Templars were. So now that we've gotten that backstory, what is the Daygar? The Daygar is basically a holy order, or at least it started out as such. This is weird for me to talk about because I don't talk about this in public. It is the holy order of Saint Sebastian of the Day Guard. This was designated by the Pope to the Templar characters. Basically, it was meant to replace the Knight Templars with the characters because after the second book, they have changed drastically. Now, in the first preview book and what's mentioned in the first official book, I say they meet with vampires. These vampires are basically, they're different from all other vampires. They don't believe that one should kill people just because they can. They feel that all of the vampires are simply children and want no part of them. They're isolationists. They keep to themselves. They have their own little kingdom, and they wish everyone to leave them alone. Spoiler alert, they do find a way of getting them to help them. I'm not going to say how, but it was rather, I think it's a little ingenious on how they did it. What they did in turn, they thought they would be getting tactical information about how to fight the vampires. The vampires created a human-vampire hybrid that will later be called the Day Guard and then the Daygar. It'll be shortened to Daygar. They're basically half human, half vampire. Now, your first thought might be, well, isn't that a vampire, daywalker like Blade? And technically, yes. However, in my universe, there's a difference between a Daygar and a Dampire. And I'll go into a few basic details of that. The Dampire are naturally created, and the Daygar are artificially created. Daygar are basically, it's the use of science of merging vampire DNA into human beings. Vampires are born as they are. When a vampire male impregnates a human female. However, it's actually very difficult for a vampire male to impregnate a human female. Even if they do, it's only like a 1% chance of that child having any vampiric ability, basically being a vampire. All others are simply human that just happen to have a vampire father. Vampires are predominantly vampire, where Daygar are predominantly human. They still have a little bit of the other one in them, but at a minority. I won't reveal any more details, but the Daygar don't need to feed. They can, but they don't need to, nor can they turn anyone into a vampire or even a Daygar. They don't have that ability, but they do get enhanced abilities. And that's what the story will center around, is basically a human vampire hybrid that's artificially created, trying to stop this vampire threat. So let's talk about the vampire threat a little bit. Sorry. What is this vampire threat? Well, as I state, the vampires are spreading the bubonic plague. And I ask the question, why would vampires spread a plague that kills off their food source? It's like killing off an entire livestock so no one can use it. And, what benefit does that serve anyone if no one can eat the meat, So, and the vampires, they're immune to the bubonic plague, but they are trying to kill people in mass. Why? Well, I won't go into the specific reasons why, but it deals with magic. In my universe, there is science and magic, but the magic can be emotional based. That say that you have a local hero of a town who can do some magic. Now, if people believe in him, like really, really believe in him, he becomes more powerful. If one does, he becomes more powerful, but he probably wouldn't notice a difference. If it was a whole town that really believed in him, he becomes more powerful. If it's a whole country, if it's like a whole country, he's that much more powerful. So the vampires are trying to cut into the power base. I won't say whose, but you could probably guess who. And that's also why they had to take the Templars out, to go from being highly respected to hated. So the Templars basically lost their ability. So that's basically why the vampires are doing this. They're trying to cut into someone's power, so they are not effective when the vampires come in for their actual invasion. Because if they came in for their actual invasion, maybe they would be successful, but it would be at a great loss to themselves. And it's one thing to take over something, but you have to have the force behind it to maintain it. And if you don't have that, you risk losing it. So that's what the vampires are trying to do. Now, one of the things that I'm going to explore in this series is the different houses of vampires. Now, in the movie Blade and the RPG Vampire the Masquerade, we saw evidence of other houses. Now, Vampire the Masquerade kind of built more on this idea that the different houses feuded with each other. Blade suggested they did, but never really showed it. But I want to take that idea and take it to the next level, that there are houses that really fight against each other. And there's a whole complex social structure of vampires from one house to the next. And this is something that's going to be explored. Now, my vampires are going to be different than the common vampires that we've seen today in a lot of media. I'm trying to take away the sex appeal. That if you still find the vampires sexy, that's because you like that sort of thing, but not because they're all sparkly or they're really good looking or they're really noble inside, but they just got a bit of evil in them. No, they're fucking evil. They are evil, evil motherfuckers. You don't want to be around a vampire, and you really don't want to become a vampire. I'm sure some people would, but that's the general idea. They are scary. They are the shadows in the night. If you're walking alone at night and you hear a rumble in the bushes, you're scared that you're going to die because you're afraid that it might be a vampire. Now, for the most part, vampires are treated as a fairy tale and a myth, but they still exist. They prefer to keep their existence low-key. But then that's why we have so many myth stories, is because there are so many attacks. So that is another thing that I'm going to really try to strive for, is that the vampires are truly, truly bad. There are some good vampires, like the isolationist vampires, but they are the exception to the rule. So this series is going to take place in many places in Europe. France and England are definitely confirmed right now. But the bubonic plague, it will be discovered in the series that it originated in China, which is actually true if you look at the history of the bubonic plague. And it will take the characters to China eventually near the end of the first series to fight the vampire threat there. So we get to be introduced to Chinese vampires. So, I mean, that's a big spoiler right there, is that all of this originated in China. And during this age, China and Europe were the powerhouses back then. Russia might have been considered a powerhouse, but not as great as those two. So, as I say the first series, because I do have series planned after this, I've kind of drawn out about 4 different series that take place through different time periods of history. I don't know if they will center all around the bubonic plague, because the bubonic plague happened several times after the fact. Happened before. This was actually the second pandemic plague during the time period that I'm writing, which did the most damage. I mean, we're talking about 2.5 million people were killed in a 10-year span. And this was already after there was the recovery from the mini ice age that occurred at the turn of the 14th century and the Great Famine of 1314 to 1315, which took them nearly 10 years to recover from that. So there was a lot of death that occurred here, and the population never quite recovered pretty much until about the 18th or 19th or the 18 and 1900s. It took a long time for Europe to recover from this. And like I said, I've done a lot of research on this. So why should you get this book? Well, you're going to get a really intricate story, a really deep level story. Now, I'm not going to like do an info dump and give you all of the details right up front. All the details are going to be there You just got to look for them and kind of put things together. Other things will be kind of blatant and explained out to you. It's a good mix of things. The other reason is that this story is going to be at a low cost. I don't believe in charging any more than $3 for my stories unless it's a special edition of some sort. Now, the main book, now when I say like the first book, the second book, the third book, I'm talking about the core books. With those are going to be supplements. With the first core book, there are going to be 4 additional supplements that are planned out. There might be 3. It depends on how the story ends up. But we've got the prologue, which is a book by itself, and that's going to be the free version that I'm going to be releasing during this campaign. It's not going to be completely edited the way it needs to be, but you'll get a sample of what this universe will look like. Then we have Night in Avalon, which is where the papacy is during the time of this era. He wasn't actually in Rome, as the Pope traditionally has been. I believe that's correct, but actually was in France in Avalon. Whole big thing about that. Then there's the there's going to be a part where they have to go to a silver mine. And then the third supplement will be kind of like a story where one character goes home before going to his next destination. Now, these supplements will add to the story, but you don't need to read them in order to get the core book. You could read just the core books and still enjoy it just fine. The reason why you want to get the supplements is to get more understanding of what's going on and get more understanding of the characters. So that's basically what it is. Now, this video is just for Pubslush. I'm going to be posting on the Pubslush site. Once this Pubslush is over, I'm deleting this video. So, and I'm doing that because the second book reveals the whole Daygar thing, and then you kind of travel with the characters to figure out what it is. And I want people to kind of take the journey with the characters as they're experiencing it. I don't want people who are reading it to know right away that that's going to happen until the series is pretty much out. The first 4 books are really going to be like the first official book. And these are all going to be short stories. Anywhere from 20 pages to 100 pages. Each core book and every supplement after that. And the reason being is basically like 3 books would equal 1 giant book. And instead of releasing 1 giant book, I release them as smaller books so that they're cheaper in the long run, but also so you can read through them a lot quicker, and you can like read it, read something else, and then come back and read the second one. Also means I get them out a lot faster. Instead of having to write 1 giant book, I can write them as a series of smaller books and get stories out faster. So maybe I can get 5 books in 1 year versus 1 giant book, and hopefully get the second one out sometime soon. This does come more at a cost to me, though, because I do have to do covers for each of those core books. And that's what this campaign is about. But I do believe that this is the best way to go about it, especially in our age where things just kind of come quick to people. You know, we've got YouTube, we've got media that's instantaneous. I want to release this as a series of short books so people can get through them quickly and get a really good feeling about them. But that doesn't mean that I won't release a book all in one that features all of these books. And if I ever do a print of this book, which I hope I do, I can do my own print, I'll release the book with all of the supplements together as one book. So I predict that the first series is going to be about 15 to 20 short stories. I figure that one whole book would be between 3 to 5 short stories. So we're looking at somewhere between um, 5 to 6 actual books broken up over into 15 to 20 stories. So that does it for me today. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I know that I went through a whole lot, and believe me, there's a whole lot more to this story. And I'm sorry if this gives away any spoilers, but this is what you're paying for. If you donate to me, this is what you're donating to. So that does it from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.